Welcome back. I want to take us into the final teaching today about reimagining work, rethinking our work in the world. And I want to begin from the last chapter in my book, Soul Tending, where I talk about my own struggle to leave congregational ministry after many years and the fears that assailed me as I thought about jumping off this cliff to suddenly have at 50-something-year-old woman, middle-aged, have no more retirement building going on. It's under the True Wealth section. It's number 104. I had assumed it was financial suicide to leave my ministerial post and the work economy to tend what the Sabbath fires had begun to kindle in me. Even more so if I left in the second half of life when retirement loomed close at hand. Perhaps it was financially insane, but I was ready to challenge work models and an economy that had become like dead weight around my neck. I'd begun to suspect that the idea that true wealth lay in benefits, income, and retirement packages was false. Instead, this so-called true wealth felt like an endless cycle of dis-ease. As author, satirist, and radio personality Garrison Keillor summarized, life is messy, and it always has been. We work hard to earn money, we neglect our health, and then we pay the money to restore our health. Meanwhile, we forgot how to enjoy life, so what good is health anyway? By the end of my tenure with my congregation, as I was heading into the abyss of no income, I understood that true wealth was community. It was my relationships and friendships that sustained my spirit and animated a network of possibilities for my future. I wasn't looking for a job, but for time to create from the inside out rather than the outside in. The vast social circles and connections I had prided myself on, thanks to my work and social predisposition, fell away as I left ministry. I longed to focus on deepening a few relationships, including the relationship with my very own soul. And of course, my relationship with my husband would also benefit from this writing of priorities. Fast forward, I like to think I have withdrawn these days from a commodity-driven economy and thrown myself more fully into an alternative Sabbath economy whose primary value is relationship, but that would be false. I have only scratched the surface. So I want to talk about this a minute, where our true wealth lies. It is in a relationship, as I talked about in the first section of looking at God's Sabbath economy, because relationship is ultimately, I believe, where our true wealth is going to come down when our capitalist economy or our money economy falls apart. We can depend on one another, and we, as being the hands and feet of Christ to one another, can bear one another up in hard times. So that's the first principle I think about reimagining work, is that we are absolutely held in a safety net of community and relationships, and not everybody is. I had the luxury of diving out of congregational ministry and exploring new opportunities for my life. But not everybody has this option. But that is the beauty, right, of what the Apostle Paul writes about, is that when one community has more than the other, then they share. And how do we begin to see ourselves as the body of Christ? The community of Christ is the body of Christ. Each part, even the most hidden parts, it says, are the most essential. Perhaps those are the people who are on the services, in the service industry, those people who are often behind the scenes, bringing us our food, taking care of us on the front lines of our health care industry. And so how do we care for one another and begin to understand that this is where our true value lies, is in our community? And what does that mean then for the kind of, how does that reorient my work in the world, perhaps? One of the things I explored in thinking about work and reimagining work is this idea of tikkun olam, which literally means to repair the world, to repair the people of God. Tikkun olam is a Hebrew word that comes out of the Jewish community, but it is this idea that our true vocation, that holiness truly lies in sometimes the work that is not paid. We might have work in the world that we get a paycheck for, but what if our true work in the world is what I do not for a paycheck, but because of my passion or compassion, because God calls me to do that in the world? So that might begin to redefine who we understand ourselves to be in terms of our work in the world. It might not be paid ultimately, where we're really truly doing that work of healing and repairing and bringing wholeness and shalom to the places in our society that are so broken. And maybe that's what Sabbath can help us reorient, is that I might go and work a 40-hour-a-week job, but then when I come to worship with my community on Sunday, how is my unpaid work reaching out to the community beyond, the community at large? So holy literally means to make whole, to heal and be healthy. And to be holy as God is holy, that is the call, actually, the biblical call. So I once heard a discussion amongst many different rabbis, Christian ministers, Buddhist monks, other teachers, spiritual teachers from other traditions, talk about what work means in the world. What is our work? And the Rabbi Amy Eilberg, was the most interesting to me, because she said, we don't so often think about and spend a lot of time in the Jewish community saying, what is God calling me to? What is my true work in the world? She said, the Jewish faith can be seen as an extension of the Hebrew Bible's exhortation to be holy, because I, the Lord your God, am holy. So this idea of that is our ultimate work in the world, is to be holy, to make whole, to heal, to be healthy. And so once we move towards holiness in the midst of our work in the world, it requires us to commune with the one who has ordered and exemplified work in the first place, right? So that's why Sabbath is so important. It reorders our work in the world. We often think that we work 7 days a week or 6 days a week or 5 days, whatever you work, and we rush headlong into that work, and then on the weekend we take a Sabbath. We breathe and we finally collapse and try to refresh and renew ourselves. But actually it's the other way around. Sabbath is the beginning, is the ultimate day of our communion and our time with the Lord of the Sabbath, that reorients and helps us prepare to go out into the workplace. So it's the first day, and everything flows from that prayerful, restful day that we have to commune with our own souls, with God, and with one another. So when we live in right alignment with God and we observe the Sabbath to keep it holy, then everything from our life flows out of that experience. The poet and activist Alice Walker said, anyone can observe the Sabbath, but making it holy surely takes the other the rest of the week, the other 6 days. I'm going to read that again because I think it's really quite profound. Alice Walker said, "Anyone can observe the Sabbath, but making it holy surely takes the rest of the week." So our true work in the world, perhaps, is often not what we do for an economic return or for profit, but when we are unplugged from that. Another principle, I think, of reimagining our work is that we are co-creating with God. That it is not my work, your work. It is what we are co-creating with God's work in the world. I think that this idea of co-creating then helps us begin to think about the whole thing of creativity in our lives. What does creativity mean to you? Do you have places where work is not work, but it is delightful and joyful? Time disappears and you're suddenly, as I talked about beekeeping, focused solely in the moment and present, so present. That is the work of creativity. And I think when we find that sweet spot, whether it's paid work or unpaid work, that is truly when we are co-creating with God. You know, Mary Oliver, who is a nature writer, actually talks a lot. She writes a lot about the path of creativity. And she examines the creative life in her book, Upstream. She talks about the importance of concentration, which is hard to find in today's highly distracted world, and the need for giving oneself to the work at hand. She said, if the creative spirit, restless spirit is rising up in you, you will be forever regretful if you don't make time for it. And she also talks about how the world is always going to come around us, calling us out there into the dizzying bedazzlement of the world. But sometimes we need to understand that creation and the act of co-creation is what Sabbath is about. The time of incubating, of going inside, of listening before we get to the act of creating and manifesting. She said, the world sheds in the energetic way of an open and communal place its many greetings, as a world should. What quarrel can there be with that? But that the self can interrupt the self, and does, is a darker and more curious matter. The fact that we allow ourselves to be endlessly distracted and interrupted makes me wonder what happens to the collective souls of our churches, our religious institutions, our educational institutions, when there's not time to create together, or to create individually in places where you can be present to the moment. There's a wonderful book called The Vital Importance, well, it's actually called In Praise of Wasting Time, by Alan Lightman. He's a scientist. In Praise of Wasting Time. And he talks about the vital importance of doing absolutely nothing, and how that is a place often where the creative co-creative experience begins, is when we are doing nothing, when we are just sometimes resting, sometimes walking, sometimes gardening, that suddenly in that contemplative space, that Sabbath space, new ideas will pop up, and we suddenly have a different perspective on how to approach our work in the world, and what to tweak in order to imagine our work in the world. Children are absolutely wonderful at doing absolutely nothing, playing, and how to insert play into the work world. And we think of all the people who feel so abused and so unvalued by their work, because we have so created a kind of economic system that people are just plugged in to pigeonholes. They are not allowed to be part of creative or co-creative work. And that perhaps that is what communities are being called to. People who have business acumen or expertise in creating, offering those places for people to work that are enjoyable, delightful, and collaborative. Leisurely work is another thing that I think about when I think about that co-creative work or reimagining work. What is leisurely work? Brother David Stendhal Roth believes that leisure does not need to be divorced from work, that we should be able to have leisurely work. And these are the things we can create in our own, our work together, whether it's in the church or whether it's in our work in the world. How do we create moments where we carve out contemplative places? That's a whole thing of that idea of ora et labora, which I talked about earlier. Prayer and work, which I experienced so profoundly at the Benedictine abbeys that I've been at, where you work and then you pray. That you bring prayer is that act of bringing attention to your life, to what is meaningful and what is important. So Stendhal Roth says, work is something we do to accomplish a purpose that lies outside the activity itself. But once the purpose is accomplished, the activity ceases. But play is something we do because we find meaning in it, an activity which has all its purpose within itself. Leisure introduces into every activity an element of play, doing whatever it be also for its own sake, not only to get it done. Thus, leisure provides a climate in which one can be open for meaning. So these are different ways of reimagining work, imagining work as, something where we're co-creating, imagining work as something that is relational, that is the work of healing and restoring relationship in the world, and leisurely work. So I want to end by, reading something by Wendell Berry, who so speaks to this thing of co-creative work with the divine. This idea of letting go of our control, that our work that we all constantly need to be in charge, manipulating, creating endless work. We can rest because God ultimately God is a worker. God calls us to work, but God ultimately has a bigger plan for how we live our lives in the world and what gives us meaning and purpose, whether it's in work, in relationship, in worship, in community. Wendell Berry from Sabbaths. Whatever is foreseen in joy must be lived out from day to day. Vision is held open in the dark by our 10,000 days of work. Harvest will fill the barn, for that the hand must ache and the face must sweat. And yet, no leaf or grain is filled by the work of ours. The field is tilled and left to grace, that we may reap. Great work is done while we're asleep. When we work well, a Sabbath mood rests on our days and finds it all good. When we work well, a Sabbath mood rests on our days and finds it good. I don't know about you, but in my work, if I don't wake up in the morning and have my little mini Sabbath time every morning, my day is totally scattered, fragmented, disoriented. I am out of my rhythm. And so there's a way of attuning our work every day to God's work and knowing that God will in good faith, bring it to fruition. Whatever it is you are doing, you pray and give it up and offer it and release it to the God, the worker God, who also ordains Sabbath as a balance to that work. And when I do that in the mornings, when I get up and I have my devotional, my prayer time, my body time, I like to do a walk or do some yoga, then my work will be productive. I'll even feel it flowing versus what happens when I don't spend time with co-creating with God. So whatever work you do in the world, how you reimagine it is mostly not even just necessarily specific. I'm not telling you to go out and get a different job. I'm telling you first to start keeping Sabbath, and first to start reorienting how you understand your work in the world. That you're not doing it for endless productivity, endless consuming, endless more. Because Sabbath teaches us there are boundaries around work. It is enough. There is enough in our lives, and we can rest with assurance and let go. So, as we live in this pandemic time, this pandemic portal, I've been reading a lot, and I feel like we are moving towards a new way of thinking about our work in the world, and maybe even our workers and the systems of economics that are running the world. We are in the middle of a chaotic, changing time. Who knows where we'll come out on the other side? But part of that is how you are thinking about it and how you are reimagining it for yourself and in your community together there in the greater Mansfield area and all those small communities. It is time for us to reimagine our lives together and our work together. So I want to end with this wonderful analogy that came to me from Rebecca Solnit. She talks about this time we're in as metamorphosing from a caterpillar to a butterfly. I mean, it's a great image, isn't it? And I think in reimagining work and the engine of work and the engine of our economy is critical, as we have been talking about, moving from the human to God's Sabbath. But here's what she says about what this time is about. A caterpillar enters its chrysalis and dissolves itself, quite literally into liquid. In this state, what was a caterpillar and will be a butterfly is neither one nor the other. It's a sort of a living soup. Within this living soup are the imaginal cells that will catalyze its transformation into winged maturity. May the best among us, the most visionary, the most inclusive, be the imaginal cells, because now we are in the soup. So may the Lord of the Sabbath and the God of creation help us imagine a new future that is just, that is life-giving, where work and Sabbath are balanced, and work and play and joy and delight, as well as our hard labors, are all honored, and our communities come into being with new ways that will be life-affirming for all. Thank you for spending this time together, and I wish you all the best as you go forward with this experience and practice of Sabbath and exploring what it might mean for your life and your community life together.